On the program today, we look at how the effecting of sales tax has been moved from April to July. Would that have any effect on Zambia's revenue overall? Xenophobia has continued in South Africa. Does this pose any effect or threats when it comes to issues of trade between these two African countries, being Zambia and South Africa? Economic space for poor people in our country. Zambia is said to be a middle-income nation with different brackets of earning income, the middle class, and the one at the end being the poor. But the third tier, what does it contribute to Zambia's economy, and how is it finding space, or has it even got space in Zambia's economic sphere? We find out these and more on Business Day. This is Business Day, and I am Judy Ngulube. On the program, we start off talking about the poor finding economic space, or do they have it already? What effect is this having on our economy? What are they bringing to the table when it comes to issues of economic space and how it will pan out? I'm very glad that my first guest is Dr. Bona Chita. He is an economics lecturer from UNZA, and of course he is an economist. So we'll be tapping into his knowledge in regards to what exactly is happening in issues of the poor and economic space.
Thanks once again, Judy. It should be our everyday topic on our slates as far as development is concerned. And this is so simply because of the one worrying factor about Zambia's socioeconomic strata, and that is we are turning out to be a very inequitable nation. Our Gini coefficient, this is a measure of the distribution of income across, as you rightly said, the different income groups from rich to poor. And our Gini coefficient shows how much is accruing to the rich, shall we say, and it is one of the worst, I think, outside South Africa now. It is over 0.65. That's very, very severe. Ideally, we would want the Gini coefficient as close to zero as possible, because that shows that all income groups are sharing the wealth equally. But as soon as it tends to 1, that is, gets closer to 1, 0.6 is pretty bad. And it's showing you that it's only the rich who are getting the wealth.
So when we look at this difference between the rich and the poor, and it widening, getting closer to 1, as you just explained to us right now, I tend to think, what does the picture look like in terms of the poor in our country? When you look at a map, when you look at the percentages, roughly, how grave is the problem of a poor population in Zambia?
60% of our people, to bring context to that, are in the rural areas. And of these 60% of the people in the rural areas, almost 90% are classified as being poor. Of those 90%, we know we have severe poverty of around 30%, as compared to the 24% or so who are categorized as poor in the urban areas. So now, of course, to this kind of macro picture, but it illuminates the extent of poverty and brings us to take us to the issue at hand that you have raised, of trying to look at the involvement of the poor households, poor people in the economy, and whether they are actually participating, or to the extent to which they're participating. So we can see, well, I was going to add that then we add on other indicators, socioeconomic indicators, that it's about 200 kwacha, 180 kwacha, I beg your pardon. So that's about $20, because the gap is about 5 times.
Yes.
So if we get average income of $20 in our rural areas, which comprises 60% of the population, we have reason to worry. These 60% are producing more or less 80% of the food that we consume happily in the urban areas without thinking about the sacrifices the rural population is making. But the unfortunate part, which I left out, is our education indicators, our health indicators, which are worsening when you look across the years but especially the poor people. At least education seems to be the worst affected. Some health indicators have been improving, such as the infant mortality rate, the under 5 mortality rate, maternal mortality rate, HIV/AIDS, which has this great impact of perpetuating, deepening poverty, is, to be fair, lower in the rural areas than it is in the urban areas.
If the poor are contributing 80%, the gap is supposed to be lowering. Where then is the loophole?
Absolutely. We should be seeing these income consumption and income earnings differences, which are so acute. We talked about $20 equivalent income, and consumption is not much better than that, just about $25, compared to the over $100 in the urban areas on average per household. And if, as you say, if you've rightly noted, why isn't this gap closing as it should be? It brings us to how are these incomes earned? By production, which we've just said, and then the production has to be bought. So it's the price which determines the income. So the wage rates in the urban areas are definitely higher because most of them are engaged in, whether they're in formal employment or informal employment, are earning something in terms of sales, or formal employment, which is the wage rate, or informal sector where they still get some form of wage rate. It simply means that the prices we pay for agricultural produce are far below what they should be in terms of creating and leading our rural population to earn a decent income. So we are thriving off the productivity or sweat of the rural people at the expense of the urban population. There is an imbalance there in how we formulate our policies as far as pricing of agricultural produce is concerned and effect them.
How then, as we wind up, would be a recommendation in regards to just shortening this gap between the rich and the poor, and the most effective way of the poor actually having economic space?
Difficult one. Let me give it a go. One thing again you mentioned, which the data shows us, the net migration is from rural area to urban areas. We know we may have migration urban to urban area, rural to rural, but when you look at net migration rural to urban, it's against the urban area. So more people are moving from rural areas to urban areas. And of course, we can guess the age group. It's the 20 to 36, 35 year age group who think, when you look at the reasons why they are migrating, to get employment, to start a business, to get access to finance services or financial means to start a business. It's those kinds of reasons that they are advancing. And yet it's a little bit of a myth, because we don't have financing arrangements that are development oriented. We have commercial banks whose lending policies quite negative. We all know, go to any of the commercial banks, you won't get less than, God knows, even up to 40% right now as we speak. What more, a person with no collateral, no skills? We looked at the education sector performance. More people are dropping out of school in the rural areas. There's as we said, a little bit of improvement in health outcomes, but not much, marginal. So how do we resolve this? I think we've seen a situation where our expenditure on agriculture and health and education for that matter, but looking at agriculture, I think in this year's national budget is down to 7%.
Yes.
It's low, extremely low by regional comparison, regional standards when we compare with countries, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and so on, Malawi, Mozambique. We are among the lowest in terms of the money we allocate to agriculture, the sector allocations. What does that imply? It means our extension services in agriculture suffer. Our input support to farmers, whatever form and whatever input, suffers. Education of farmers suffers. Investment in infrastructure, such as the roads. Urban areas are having all these beautiful roads. The rural areas are lacking decent gravel roads on which to move inputs and produce. It's again this maldistribution of resources both at the private and public level. Go to any part of the rural areas, see how many roads have been graded this past season. I don't think you'll find many. I know because I go to the rural almost on the monthly basis, the area I come from anyway. Until we can get all this support infrastructure around rural productivity going, and until we can get the pricing right for agricultural produce and fair, and then until we can, most importantly, get the children to be supported in schools and learning. More than half the kids seem to be out of school. Until we get the human capital investments right, then agriculture will continue to be a wasted investment. And yet that's the only route that will uplift people out of poverty, whether we like it or not. Other models we can theorize on, we can debate, but this is the one sure way of getting people out of poverty. Get agriculture right.
One sure way, definitely. I will be talking to the Ministry of Agriculture and Education in some of those that you have juxtaposed to get a reaction from them. But appreciate you coming through and having this discussion with us.
Thank you. Well, I was just beginning. Thank you.
Definitely. No, these conversations don't end.
No, of course not.
You could go on, but I hope you honor our invite if we call on you again.
My pleasure.
All right. Okay, so I have been talking to Dr. Bona Chita. He is an economist coming from the University of Zambia here in Lusaka, Zambia, giving us his take on issues of how to just reduce the gap between the rich and the poor when it comes to classes in Zambia's economy. We move on with the program. Join me on the other side. All right, thank you so much for still watching Business Day. We now get into issues of sales tax. Now, earlier in the year, or was it at the end of last year, we did talk about sales tax and how April would be the month that's going to be affected. It's already April, and we did hear recently in the media, in the news, that they've pushed the effecting of these sales tax to July. What impact will this have on our country, especially when it comes to issues of revenue? Mr. Sichilongo, business consultant, is in studio with me. Thank you so much for coming through. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Judy. Thank you for having me.
All right, appreciate. Moving this, did it come as a surprise to you?
No, not at all. A change over from one system, the way we want to move from VAT to sales tax is quite involving. There are a lot of aspects that have to be considered. One of them, of course, is there has to be legislation, enabling legislation for the implementation, which for some time we did not see. We did not hear how it was going to be done. And to me, it was expected that we would not be able to launch on the date that had been announced because we had not seen all those things happening. If you recall, prior to 1995, would you recall? Before the implementation of VAT, there was a lot of sensitization of what was going to change, how it was going to affect the day-to-day running of the business, the expectations on the part of the business owners, all those, and generally the community, what to expect to have to demand for an invoice or a receipt, all those so far, and anyway, prior to this deferment of the implementation date, we did not see much of those.
In fact, let's do a little recap here. I know it's been talked about in the media a lot, but as we're getting closer to it, and July, which is not so far, maybe just what this means, shifting from VAT to sales tax. What is it?
Yeah, VAT, I think the major difference, maybe we can start from there, is that we want to move away from a tax that requires ZRA to refund. I think that's where the main challenge has been, having to refund, and because of the issues that were in the process, that were found in that process, it was found that in some instances more was being refunded, more than what had been collected. And that is not how it should be. Tax should be collected, not the net position being that of a deficit. So we see that it's the issue of refund that is being run away from. So when you get into the sales tax, which also we are yet to understand which one is it, because in some situations we hear it's goods and services tax, in others it's sales tax. There is a difference between those two. GST seems to be more similar to VAT still, which means there may be some points, just like VAT, at which collections may have to be made. Yes, and probably refunded. So I think we are not yet clear, at least from my perspective, whether it is GST or it is just ST that we are moving to. But I think the idea is to move away from a position of having to refund time and again, because it's quite involving to manage that whole process without having to go beyond what you need to refund.
So this move from April to July is being necessitated by the fact that all these things have not been put in place, is it?
In my view, I think that the process, like I said, needs a lot of preparation, not only on the part of ZRA as the collector of taxes, because they need to be ready to receive that revenue in the form that they are proposing. I think there are also issues, well, when we talk about issues within ZRA, we're talking about software, because I think what is in place now is the VAT system, which VAT might not end on that particular day that this is the final, the normal VAT. There is always a phase down where all those pending issues, there has to be room. So that system may not be shut down on that actual day, because everything has to be cleared and everyone who is due for a refund.
So it's like a gradual process in terms of letting this down. Where then does this leave our country in terms of revenue collection? What happens April, May, June, July? In these 3 months, we're going to be using VAT. Would that have a very grave effect on revenue for Zambia?
The effect will definitely be there, and my prayer is that measures can be put in place to mitigate that possible loss in terms of revenue. But if everything is done according to how it should be done, I think between now and that time, I think the risk is not so much. My worry is more on a post-implementation of the new system, because that's where you have teething problems. That's where you have problems arising merely from not understanding the procedure. And having seen implementation of some of the tax systems in the past 20 years, I can say that there are always those situations arising out of not knowing, not only on the part of the business side, but also within the implementing institution, because the training also has to take some time, and then from training you have to learn the actual.
And discussions around this, economic scholars and most people who are dealing with issues of tax are talking about this being sort of going backwards, in terms of we are one of I think 3 or 2 countries in Africa who are now going back to use sales tax when everyone else is moving from sales tax going to VAT. Your take on that very quickly?
Yeah, of course, those are genuine concerns, but I think that what we may have, I'm just speculating though, is that we may have something that will take parts of sales tax, parts of GST, and probably even parts of VAT, which would be able to attend to our situation, basically to deal with the problem that we've had in terms of refunds. That's what I would be expecting. I would not want to see a cut and paste arrangement. It's going to give us problems. But if we look at our own situation, I hope this time is what we are using the time to come up with something that will be tailored for Zambia, given our
sculpture it into our own.
Yes, something
our own
that
sound
will
of
work
the
for
Zambian
us.
sales tax.
Yes, that's what I would be.
Let me take you to another thing, Mr. Sichilongo. Now, we all know that xenophobia has continued in our neighboring country, which is South Africa. South Africa and Zambia are neighbors, and we do a lot of trade with them. Xenophobia's effect on trade.
Definitely.
How out of, if we had to put it out of 10, how bad?
Over 5. I
Wow.
think.
Okay.
Yes, it's quite major. Trade and business in general, it survives in a certain environment where there is no peace. That's why we hear politicians talking about a conducive environment, an enabling environment, selling Zambia as a top destination for investment because the peace and stability. It is very important because one would want some confidence in the safety of their investment. So when you have situations like the xenophobic attacks that have happened in South Africa, it is a matter of very serious concern, not only for Zambia directly with South Africa, but I think for the region and for Africa as a whole, because it's African on African. Not that African on white would be okay, it is still not okay, but it means that it sends ripples across the whole continent. South Africa itself has got an export of about over $100 billion, and some of it, a good percentage, comes through by road, and that is the route that is under attack. We've had reports of trucks being bent down for the reason that they're being driven by a foreign national. There has not been regard to the cargo that is being moved, where it's going, the values on those trucks. So we find that the effect not only between Zambia and South Africa, but it is there, the effect will be there because Zambian companies are importing from South Africa.
Yes.
South Africa is in the top 5 of Zambia's top trading partners. There's Switzerland, there's China, there's Congo, there's South Africa. I can't recall the other one. So we find that there is a serious relationship in terms of trade between Zambia and South Africa. The transit countries, there's Zimbabwe, without talking about Zambia, Zimbabwe, South Africa direct. There's Zambia being a transit to the Congo. We see a lot of volumes. If you go to the border points like Chirundu and Livingstone, there's a lot of volume of South Africa.
And when you talk, Mr. Sichilongo, about sending ripples across the African continent, it takes me to the issue of the continental Africa free trade area,
Yes.
those free trade area zones. If there are reactions like this from some African countries, maybe this won't be unique to only one country like South Africa, but would this also, is it sending a signal that Africans are not ready to trade amongst each other, be it through services or goods?
It sends a negative sentiments out there, but it also depends on how we handle it as neighbors and as a continent, because I think that we've missed a number of opportunities in the past to deal with the problem firmly, and it's only now that we are taking that initiative, and I'm glad that Zambia is more or less at the forefront, despite not having any recorded cases. But I think it has been our role since time immemorial to deal with such issues. I think it is important that we take a position as a continent. Otherwise, what you are talking about might materialize. We may have challenges to have that free continental area. Because when such things happen, there are always reprisals that you cannot get into another country to defend your people. So you say that, there are people who are here, let's deal with them. South Africa has got a lot of companies running contracts across the continent, not only in Zambia. So it's very important that it is dealt with at that level. If there's need to do a commission of inquiry, maybe under AU, that should be the way to go, so that we establish exactly what and ensure the security of goods moving around the continent. Otherwise, the future of the continent lies in free trade.
Free trade.
Yes.
And if this is happening,
of both goods and people. If you found a job, let me give my example. If I found a job in Senegal, I should be able to go and work freely in Senegal. If
it's human resources, goods, it's services,
yes,
isn't it?
As long as it is done in the proper way. Yes.
I appreciate you coming through once again.
It's a pleasure, Judy. Thanks for having me.
All right. Join us next week at the same time as we give you more information in regards to business and entrepreneurship, not forgetting the corporate world. On behalf of the entire production crew, I'm Judy Ngulube.